The Zephyrian Empire had conquered 847 star systems with the casual efficiency of someone organizing their sock drawer. Their crystalline forms, think living geodes with delusions of grandeur, sparkled magnificently across the galaxy as they went about the business of being absolutely, unquestionably superior to every other species they encountered. And why wouldn't they be? They possessed technology that could reshape matter at the quantum level, telepathic abilities that made communication instantaneous across light years, and the kind of arrogance that comes naturally to beings who've never met their match. Emperor Vex'thul, whose name roughly translated to sharp-edged perfection in the 17 languages he'd conquered this decade, ruled from his throne ship, a crystalline monstrosity the size of Manhattan that could punch holes through neutron stars for fun. He was, by all measurable standards, the most powerful being in the known galaxy. His empire's subjects numbered in the trillions, his fleets could glass entire worlds in minutes, and his scientific academies had solved problems that other species hadn't even learned to ask yet. So naturally, when the Empire encountered humanity, they filed them under quaint local fauna and moved on with their day. The initial assessment was thorough, as Zephyrian assessments tended to be. Humans, the report concluded, were a barely evolved species of bipedal mammals who still burned fossil fuels for energy, hadn't developed proper telepathy, and were so technologically backward they used electromagnetic radiation for communication like some sort of cosmic cavemen. Their greatest achievement appeared to be pointing metal tubes at each other and making loud noises. The scientific consensus was clear: harmless herbivores with delusions of grandeur. This assessment might have been accurate, had the Zephyrian scientists bothered to check what humans actually ate. But why would they? The creatures were obviously non-threatening. They had forward-facing eyes, clearly for better fruit-gathering precision, and their technology was so primitive it was almost adorable. Like watching a toddler build castles in a sandbox while real architects worked nearby. The Empire might have continued ignoring humanity indefinitely, if not for what the Zephyrians would later refer to as the incident that made everyone reconsider their life choices. It started, as most galactic catastrophes do, with routine bureaucracy. A Zephyrian mining operation on Kepler 442b needed rare minerals for their latest fleet expansion. The planet was uninhabited, well, unless you counted the few human research stations, but honestly, who was counting those? The mining fleet arrived, set up their quantum extractors, and began the entirely reasonable process of strip mining the planet's core. Then they vanished. Not gradually, not with distress calls or dramatic final transmissions. One moment they were there, pulverizing mountains with casual efficiency. The next moment, the long-range sensors showed empty space and a few asteroid fields that definitely hadn't been there before. Emperor Vex'thul dispatched a rescue fleet. Standard procedure. Probably some equipment malfunction or spatial anomaly. These things happened. The rescue fleet also vanished. He sent a second rescue fleet, this one equipped with the latest stealth technology and enough firepower to crack moons. They arrived at Kepler 442b, conducted a thorough scan of the system, and reported finding nothing. Empty space, cosmic debris, and a handful of human vessels puttering around the area like they owned the place. Then that fleet vanished too. This was when Emperor Vex'thul decided that perhaps these harmless herbivores deserved his personal attention. After all, pest control was beneath his station, but sometimes one had to make exceptions for particularly persistent insects. The Emperor's flagship dropped out of hyperspace at Kepler 442b, with enough accompanying vessels to sterilize a small galactic arm. The crystalline hulls of the Zephyrian dreadnoughts gleamed against the cosmic backdrop like jewelry scattered across black velvet, their quantum cannons charging with energies that could rewrite the laws of physics in localized areas. What greeted them was a single human vessel, barely larger than a Zephyrian shuttle, broadcasting a message on primitive electromagnetic frequencies. "Welcome to Kepler 442b system. Please state your business and prepare for customs inspection." Customs inspection. The Emperor of 847 star systems was being asked to submit to customs inspection by a species that had discovered fire approximately 5 minutes ago in galactic terms. Captain Dmitry Volkov of the human colonial navy appeared on their communication screens, looking remarkably unimpressed for someone facing down enough firepower to glass his entire homeworld. He wore a simple blue uniform, had graying hair, and regarded the massive alien fleet with the sort of mild interest one might show a neighbor's new garden gnome. "Afternoon," Volkov said, as if massive alien invasions were a routine Tuesday occurrence. "I'm assuming you're here about the mining rights dispute. Ambassador Chen is on her way up to discuss terms." Emperor Vex'thul found himself in the unprecedented position of being confused. Where was the terror, the desperate pleading, the immediate surrender of this clearly inferior species? Instead, these humans were treating his arrival like a scheduled business meeting. "I am Emperor Vex'thul," he announced, his crystalline form resonating with harmonic frequencies that had reduced entire species to trembling worship. "Ruler of the Zephyrian Empire, master of 847 star systems, he whose will reshapes reality." "That's nice," Captain Volkov replied, apparently immune to cosmic majesty. "I'm Dmitry. Nice to meet you. Would you like some coffee while we wait for Chen? She's bringing the paperwork." The Emperor decided to skip the pleasantries and proceed directly to intimidation. A nearby asteroid, roughly the size of a city, disappeared in a flash of quantum energy, reduced to its component atoms in microseconds. The display of power was subtle by Zephyrian standards, but should have been more than sufficient to demonstrate the futility of resistance. Captain Volkov watched the demonstration with polite attention, then glanced at his instruments. "Not bad," he said. "Clean dispersal pattern, minimal energy waste. We've been doing something similar since Tuesday, but our approach focuses more on controlled demolition, less flashy, but better resource recovery." He pressed a button on his console. A much larger asteroid, one that had been lurking innocuously in the outer system, suddenly bloomed into a perfectly spherical expansion of incandescent gas. The explosion was controlled, precise, and left behind a neat collection of processed minerals floating in organized formations. "Gravitational lensing combined with targeted nuclear compression," Volkov explained helpfully. "We find it's more efficient than quantum dissolution, plus you get better yield on the rare earth elements. Would you like to see our strip mining techniques? We've got some lovely footage from the Tau Ceti operation." For the first time in his 3,000-year reign, Emperor Vex'thul experienced what humans would have recognized as cognitive dissonance. These primitive creatures had just demonstrated technology that, while crude by Zephyrian standards, showed a disturbing level of practical application and creative problem-solving. Ambassador Chen Wei-Ming arrived shortly after, piloting a vessel that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts and good intentions. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and the sort of smile that suggested she knew several things you didn't, and wasn't particularly concerned about the knowledge gap. "Emperor Vex'thul," she said, inclining her head in what might have been respect or might have been the gesture one makes when acknowledging a mildly interesting museum exhibit. "I understand there's been some confusion about mining rights in this system." "Confusion?" The Emperor's harmonic resonance cracked slightly. Your species has somehow eliminated 3 of my fleets. Chen consulted a tablet with the sort of bureaucratic efficiency that transcended species. Well, eliminated is a strong word. We prefer relocated for administrative processing. Your people are fine. We've got them in comfortable holding facilities while we sort out the paperwork. Apparently, there was some miscommunication about territorial boundaries. This was when Vex'thul began to suspect that perhaps the Empire's initial assessment of humanity had contained a few minor oversights. The meeting that followed would later be studied in Zephyrian military academies as a masterclass in psychological warfare, though the humans seemed to consider it a routine diplomatic negotiation. Ambassador Chen presented mining surveys, territorial maps, and resource allocation spreadsheets with the same casual competence that Vex'thul used to reshape matter at the quantum level. Every Zephyrian technological demonstration was met with polite interest and helpful suggestions for improvement. Their quantum cannons. Interesting approach, though you might want to consider rotating your firing frequency to avoid harmonic resonance in crystalline targets. Their matter manipulators. Very nice. We use something similar for terraforming, though ours work better in high-gravity environments. Their telepathic communication networks. Clever, though you're going to run into bandwidth issues once you scale past a few thousand participants. By the 3rd hour of negotiations, Emperor Vex'thul's advisors were experiencing what their medical officers would later classify as acute existential vertigo. These humans weren't just unimpressed by Zephyrian superiority, they were treating the Empire like a slightly backward neighbor who needed gentle guidance on proper galactic etiquette. It was researcher Claxney who first noticed the problem. While the diplomats exchanged pleasantries and technical specifications, he had been conducting discreet scans of the human vessels. What he found made his crystalline matrix vibrate with frequencies that translated roughly to "oh no, oh no, no, no." The humans weren't just unimpressed by Zephyrian technology, they were actively reverse engineering it in real time. Every scan, every demonstration, every casual display of imperial superiority was being analyzed, catalogued and improved upon by human scientists who treated advanced galactic technology like an interesting puzzle to solve during their lunch break. Worse yet, they were developing countermeasures. The human ships weren't primitive. They were specifically designed to appear primitive while hiding defensive systems that could neutralize every weapon in the Zephyrian arsenal. The humans had apparently studied the Empire's military capabilities and decided that the best defense was to make their opponents underestimate them so thoroughly that conflict became unnecessary. Researcher Claxney's findings triggered what the Zephyrians would later remember as the Great Revelation of Terrible Understanding. A crash research program was initiated, diving deep into human biology, psychology, and history. What they discovered was far worse than anyone had imagined. Humans, it turned out, had evolved from something the galaxy had never seen: apex predators with emotional intelligence. The research team's findings painted a picture of a species that had crawled its way up from the bottom of their planet's food chain through the simple expedient of being better at warfare than anything else that had ever lived. They had turned survival into an art form, competition into entertainment, and conflict resolution into a science that involved precisely calculated applications of overwhelming force. Their history was a catalogue of innovations driven by the fundamental question: how can we kill that thing more efficiently? Fire, metalworking, agriculture, engineering, space travel. Every human advancement could be traced back to their species' fundamental drive to become better predators. They had weaponized everything from gravity to bacteria, and their idea of peaceful exploration involved traveling to distant worlds, specifically to find new and exciting ways to survive in hostile environments. The Zephyrians discovered that humans practiced something called extreme sports, which involved deliberately placing themselves in mortal danger for recreational purposes. They had developed disaster movies as entertainment, watched their own species compete in gladiatorial combat they called mixed martial arts, and considered mutually assured destruction a perfectly reasonable diplomatic strategy. Most disturbing of all, they had apparently decided that the Zephyrian Empire was not a threat worth taking seriously. The psychological evaluation was the final nail in the coffin of Zephyrian superiority. Human diplomatic protocols weren't based on submission or dominance. They were based on the assumption that any species advanced enough for interstellar travel was probably reasonable enough to negotiate with. Their casual dismissal of imperial power wasn't arrogance. It was confidence born from the absolute certainty that if negotiations failed, they had backup plans involving applications of force that would make Zephyrian warfare look like a children's game. Emperor Vex'thul read the final report while floating in his meditation chamber, surrounded by the harmonic resonances that had once seemed like the epitome of cosmic sophistication. Now they just reminded him of wind chimes, pretty but ultimately decorative. The report's conclusion was inescapable. Humanity represented the galaxy's first encounter with apex predators who had developed ethics, empathy, and emotional intelligence without losing their fundamental nature as the most successful killers their planet had ever produced. They weren't herbivores with delusions of grandeur. They were carnivores with self-restraint. And they had been deliberately restraining themselves during every interaction with the Empire. The revelation struck Vex'thul like a quantum cannon to his crystalline matrix. Every polite suggestion, every helpful technical improvement, every casual demonstration of human capability had been a choice. They could have destroyed his fleets, conquered his empire, or simply ignored the Zephyrians entirely. Instead, they had chosen diplomacy, not from weakness but from strength so overwhelming that violence had become unnecessary. When Emperor Vex'thul returned to the negotiations, Ambassador Chen was discussing mineral extraction quotas with the same cheerful efficiency she had displayed earlier. Captain Volkov was sharing coffee with several Zephyrian officers who were apparently fascinated by human beverage preparation techniques. The Emperor's entrance interrupted a conversation about crop rotation and its applications to asteroid farming. Ambassador Chen, Vex'thul said, his harmonic frequencies modulated to something approaching humility. I believe we have been operating under some fundamental misunderstandings about the nature of our respective species. Chen looked up from her spreadsheets with the sort of expression that suggested she had been waiting for this conversation. Oh, what kind of misunderstandings? We assumed you were a primitive species in need of our guidance. And now, Emperor Vex'thul, master of 847 star systems, he whose will reshapes reality, slowly inclined his crystalline form in what could only be described as a bow. Now I understand that you have been showing us the courtesy of allowing us to believe we were in control of this situation. Chen's smile was warm, genuine, and absolutely terrifying in its implications. That's very perceptive of you, Emperor. Would you like to discuss a proper trade agreement? I think our species could benefit from a more honest relationship. As the Emperor straightened from his bow, he found himself contemplating the cosmic irony of the situation. For 3 millennia, the Zephyrian Empire had defined apex predation as the ability to destroy anything that opposed them. They had never encountered a species that defined it as the wisdom to choose not to. The galaxy, it seemed, was about to learn a new definition of power, not the capacity for destruction, but the restraint to build something better instead. And the teachers apparently were a species that had spent their entire evolutionary history perfecting the art of controlled violence in service of uncontrolled curiosity. Somewhere in the back of his crystalline consciousness, Emperor Vex'thul began to suspect that the humans had been planning this conversation from the moment they first detected Zephyrian ships in their space. They had probably prepared multiple contingency plans, analyzed every possible imperial response, and chosen their approach based on achieving exactly this outcome. He realized, still being managed. The only difference was that now he was aware of it. And somehow, that awareness felt less like defeat and more like the beginning of a very interesting education.